Passover holiday. I hope everyone had a meaningful and fulfilling Pesach. But Pesach in a sense, is not over. Because in Judaism, every holiday is a prelude to the next holiday. That's true about all holidays, but especially about Pesach, Passover. We Jews are very sensitive to time. You know, in other cultures, they put much greater emphasis on space, holy places, shrines. We also have ours, but our greatest emphasis is on time. Our emphasis is on making time meaningful. And that's what a holiday is all about. Celebrating the time. That's why if it's inconvenient to have the holiday on a certain day, we don't say, well, let's postpone it. Let's do what they do with President's Day. You know, it's too inconvenient to have 2 days. Let's consolidate them, and it's not on the birthday of the president. We can't play around with that because time is a living entity. Time has a soul. Just like space has a soul, so does time have a soul, and we affect the soul of time with the things that we do on each day, especially during holidays. And every holiday has its own aura. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's awe-inspiring. It motivates us to repent for the sins that we've committed. Passover, on the other hand, is a time of joy. It's a time of celebration, celebrating our Exodus. We have another holiday coming up in 6 weeks. That's the holiday of Shavuos, or Shavuot, if you want to use the Sephardic pronunciation. Shavuos is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. But these two holidays are linked more than any other holidays, because the Torah doesn't even tell us when Shavuot is. Every holiday would tell you it's the 1st of the month, it's the 10th of the month, the 15th of the month. But Shavuot, which occurs on the 6th of the month, it doesn't say that in the Torah. In the Torah it says that you shall observe Passover on the 15th day of the month of Nisan. And on the next day, let me just mute. On the next day, you start counting up till 50 days. And on that day is the holiday of Shavuos. That's when you celebrate the giving of the Torah. So the Torah makes it clear that the connection between Passover and Shavuos is an organic one. Just like the connection between the brain and the leg is an organic one. One has to be inherently connected to the other. The same thing, Shavuos and Pesach are connected. And they're connected by another mitzvah, another commandment. In short, the other commandment is called Sphero. Sphero literally means counting. The correct title, the whole word, is Sephiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. What exactly does that mean? What is the Omer? Omer is simply a measure, like we say a pound, or that's a weight. If we, it's a measure of volume. And what does counting have to do with a measure of volume? On the second day of Passover, the Torah commanded the Jewish people to bring a special offering. And the offering was an omer of barley, a measure of barley that was burnt on the altar. And the Torah then says, from that ceremony, from that ritual, you start counting 50 days. So that's why it's called Sephiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. You're counting the days from the time that you brought the measure of barley in the temple. Why we refer to it by the measure, and why not just by the actual barley itself, or whatever other aspect of the offering, we'll leave for another time. But that's just the title, Sphiras Omer, the counting from the time that they offered the measure of barley. You count 50 days, and then you have Shavuot. So we're going to talk about the significance of this period, why we count the days. We also count the weeks, by the way. When we count the days, every day, we say today is 10 days, which is 1 week and 3 days. We count weeks and we count the days. And that's why the holiday of Shavuos, what does the word Shavuos mean? What?
7 weeks?
No, it's close. It means weeks. The holiday of weeks. What kind of a name is that for a holiday? A holiday of weeks. Because to get to that holiday, you have to count 7 weeks to get to that holiday. So that's why it's called Sphiras HaOmer, and that's why we count, and we count the days and the weeks. But this period is a little bit of a paradox. On one hand, it would seem to be a joyous time, connecting two very momentous holidays. Passover, the holiday of our liberation. Shavuos, the holiday when we got the Torah and we became a full-fledged nation. And it is indeed a special, auspicious period. But unfortunately, tragically, it became a sad period later on in history. And the story is, briefly, Rabbi Akiva, who was unquestionably the greatest sage of not only of his time, but of generations before and after him. Rabbi Akiva was the most remarkable person. We could spend classes just on describing Rabbi Akiva's life. He was an illiterate, anti-cleric shepherd up to the age of 40 when he eloped with the daughter of the richest Jew in Israel. Kalba Savua was his name. And she realized he had potential, and because of her prodding and encouragement, he became the greatest rabbi alive, overshadowing all the others, outshining all the others. And he amassed an incredible number of students, 24,000. Everyone wanted to be his student. I'm sure they had other teachers as well, but they all clung to him. And all of them, every single one of those 24,000, died in an epidemic within this period. So it became a sad period, even though it really inherently is a joyous time. So it's a mixture. It's confusing. Maybe that's the design. It should be confusing, that when you're mourning, you remember the positive, and when you remember the positive, you don't get carried away with it. You remember the negative as well to keep you in check. At any rate, whatever the explanation is for this paradox, we have these two opposite experiences in this period, a period of joy and a period also of limited sadness. So, Sphero, and I'm going to refer to from now on as Sphero, which is shorthand for the counting of the Omer. Sphero is a time bridge between Passover and Shavuos. And here is a very powerful lesson. I'm going to share 3 different meditations, or 3 different things to focus on when we deal with Sphero. Number 1, Sphero is what links freedom to responsibility. Everybody cherishes freedom. This country was built on the idea of freedom, and for that we're eternally grateful that we live in a country so far, although it looks like it's changing, where freedom is the thing that everyone craves for and everyone was given. We have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and for Jews that's the most important freedom. Even if they take away the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech and the freedom of congregating, but they don't take away the freedom of religion, we Jews could survive. If they take that away, then we're back in the Soviet Union, where Judaism and religion in general was crushed. So we cherish freedom tremendously. But we have to realize, and that's what Sphero tells us by linking Passover to Shavuos, that freedom in and of itself doesn't really liberate us. That sounds like an oxymoron. Freedom doesn't liberate. Well, that's what freedom means. You're free in a very limited way, but your soul is still in a prison. If you have no sense of responsibility, if you have no sense of what life is all about, what's the purpose in life? Freedom is only true to its name if it's followed by responsibility. And it's interesting that when God tells Moses to liberate the Jews, Moses, I'm sure you remember, was hesitant, reluctant. He said, no, who am I? I can't do it. And then he says something about the Jews. He says, could I take them out of Egypt? In other words, he wasn't really so convinced that the Jews were worthy of being liberated. So what does God tell him? You would expect God to respond, they're pretty good, they're all right, they're deserving, they suffered enough, let me take them out of Egypt and that'll be fine. No, God doesn't say that. God says, when they leave Egypt, they will serve me on this mountain, referring to the giving of the Torah. Well, what kind of an answer is that? And the explanation is, Moses was not trying to say the Jews could not be liberated. Sure, they can be liberated if God wants to. But what would be the purpose of their liberation? They would go right back into another form of slavery because they have no purpose in life. A free person without a purpose in life, without responsibility, is a dangerous person. We don't want those. We want those people to be behind bars if they have no purpose in life, because for them, when we look around and we see the shootings, people shoot others and then they shoot themselves. What's going on over there? What's the mentality over there? What's going on is, I don't care about anything. Nothing has any meaning and purpose to me. Instead of trying to reduce the number of guns or treating mental patients, which are both approaches taken by different factions, how to stop this type of violence, and it's not just limited to gun violence, it's all kinds of violence. How do we stop it? You stop it by giving people a sense of responsibility, raising them from the time they're a child, not the way they're raised in public schools, but raising them with a sense that God created them, and God created them with a purpose, and their purpose is to serve God. And you serve God by being kind. You serve God by being compassionate. You serve God by taking responsibility for yourself and for others. If this would be the way we train people, instead of training them that they could change their gender when they're 6 years old, that's going to make these people decent citizens. Guarantee that's going to destroy their lives, because you're leaving out the most important part of education. And I'm just going to go off on a tangent a little bit. We know you can't teach religion in school. That's not true. They're teaching religion. The religion of atheism. That's a fanatical, extreme religion. I'll get in trouble for everything I just said. But it has to be said. It has to be said. It has to be said that we're not educating, we're indoctrinating children with atheism, because if you don't allow them to recognize that there's a God who gave us commandments and we have to follow them, then they're being told there's a religion called, they don't call it as atheism, but it's a new religion. So Sphero is about connecting freedom with responsibility. So connected is Sphero, is Passover to Shavuos through Sphero, that in the days that the Torah was written, this didn't happen. But now you can travel from America to Australia, or from Australia to America, crossing the international date line. And when you're counting days, today is the day number 10. If I would take a flight to Australia, they're a day ahead of me. So they're going to be counting 11, let's say I get there today, and for me it's the 10th day. But I go counting, I don't count what they're doing, I count by what I'm doing, because I can't skip from 10 to 12. I have to count 10, 11, 12. So I'm going to celebrate Shavuot on a different day than everyone else. Because the Torah says you determine when the holiday occurs in 50 days. Doesn't make a difference who's counting in the place where you're at, as long as you're counting and it's your 50th day. That becomes Shavuos. So this is the first thing about Sphero. We have to recognize during this period that our freedom that is cherished is only worthy of its name when it's connected to responsibility, and a responsibility that is not made up by people, but made up by the absolute God. If you don't believe in an absolute God, if you say, well, morality is situational, morality is relative to which generation, then you're going to end up, I can't guarantee how you're going to end up, but you'll end up either being a Hitler or a Stalin. That's what happens in the end. Because if you believe that morals could change overnight or over a generation, then it could lead to anything, which is what happened in society. But then there's another reason why we count Sphero. First is to connect the two holidays. The second reason, taken from a midrash, is that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they were told that they're going to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai in 50 days. And they started counting the days. They started counting because they were so anxious to receive the Torah. Yes?
So why do you count 1, 2, 3?
Okay, good question. If we have time, we'll get to it today. Otherwise, we'll do it next week. Yes?
So the Jewish people were told in advance.
Right. Normally, when you count, because you're anxious to get to something, you said I have 50 days left, 49 days left, 48 days left. And instead, we count today is day 1, today is 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. Why do we do it in the reverse order? Yes?
Rabbi, it says that the Jews were not free until they received the Torah. However, the first commandment was given Rosh Chodesh before they received the Torah. And
No, the first commandment is God saying, I am the God who is taking you out of the land of Egypt. Now, of course, they knew about God before that, but it was not enshrined in...
Isn't Rosh Chodesh the first commandment?
Oh, okay. That was the first commandment they got as a Jewish people, but that's not the first of the 10 commandments, the so-called 10 commandments.
Right. But it's the first commandment that God gives us.
As a people, yeah.
Is Rosh Chodesh. And in that commandment, in addition, it also says, this shall be the beginning for you.
Right.
So what I'm thinking is that either that's part of the Torah when Rosh Chodesh is itself part of the Torah,
Right.
but I don't know exactly how to put that together.
But what happened at Mount Sinai was entirely different from what they were told before. At Mount Sinai, this was a new revelation, unique, that outshines the commandments that were given before. But that's that commandment, why it's considered to be the first, although it's not the first of the 10 commandments, is a separate subject. I don't want to get off the subject too much. So the counting of the Omer is said to be an experience of yearning to get the Torah. Yearning is extremely important in Judaism. Yearning is a sign that you're a human being. I don't think an animal, even the most intelligent animal, ever gets up in the morning and says, I aspire to become a better animal and I'm going to do more good than I did the day before. Why do people climb mountains? Because it's there. But the reason why people climb mountains is because the human spirit is one that is constantly yearning to go higher. If you look at the soul wants to go higher in a spiritual sense, in a moral sense, in an ethical sense. But the soul sends messages to the body, to the conscious mind, and we wake up in the morning and we have ambition, we have yearning. Sometimes it can be very negative. Sometimes it can be positive, it could be neutral. But yearning is a very essential part of the human condition. The Talmud, when it talks about different types of damages, I think I mentioned this not too long ago, refers to a human being who commits a crime by a name that the Talmud says means someone who is yearning for something, someone who is praying for something. That a human being is a praying being, praying with an A and sometimes with an E. But they're both connected because humans cannot stay in one place. A human being who stays in one place is not a healthy human being. A human being has to constantly aspire to something bigger. And if your godly soul is revealed, then you want to get closer to God. And it makes you want to get the Torah. If your animal soul is in ascendancy, then you'll want to have power to dominate others. You want to amass great fortune, regardless of how you're going to get to it. So that's what a human being is. A human being is an aspiring, yearning, hoping creature. There's a passage in the Talmud that Haman, the wicked Haman who wanted to annihilate all the Jews, when did he know that his plan would not materialize? So the Talmud tells a story that Mordechai gathered children, 22,000 children, and he's taught them the laws of the Omer. Remember, the Omer is the measure of barley that you bring on the second day of Passover in the temple. Well, that was the second day of Passover. And what is Mordechai teaching the kids about an offering in the temple that didn't exist? When Haman sees these kids, he asked them, "What are you studying now?" Because he was very superstitious. And they said, "We're studying about the laws of the Omer, the offering in the temple." What temple? When temple? You don't have a temple. Achashverosh made sure that the temple would not be rebuilt. And Haman probably had a part of that decree. So they said, well, we believe that Mashiach is coming and we'll have a temple and we'll have to bring this offering. It could even be today. When he saw the faith and the hope and the yearning that even little children had, he said, I know I have been defeated. I'm not going to win this, because they have this tremendous desire and yearning for something so holy. And what were they studying? The laws of the Omer, interestingly. But there's a tinge of sadness in all this. The question has been asked by great Talmudic authorities going back 700-800 years ago. Whenever we do a mitzvah, a seasonal mitzvah, there's a special blessing that we recite. What's the blessing? Shehechayanu. Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe, who has given us life, has sustained us, and has allowed us to reach this time, this milestone. So we thank God. We only do it for seasonal mitzvahs. We don't, before putting on tefillin in the morning, we don't say it, because we do that every day, virtually every day. Only mitzvahs that are seasonal. Well, counting the Omer is a seasonal mitzvah. It only happens in one period of the year. So why don't we recite that blessing before the first time that we count the Omer? And one of the answers to that question is by drawing an analogy to another mitzvah that we don't say Shechayanu, at least Ashkenazi Jews. At a bris, there's no greater mitzvah than circumcision. We do not recite the Shechayanu. Why? Because that blessing can only be said when the joy is unmitigated. The joy is perfect, is complete. A bris is a great source of joy, but there's one person at the bris who is not in a good mood. It's the mother. No, only kidding. It's the little baby. The baby has pain. However people say that the baby's pain is very minimal, he hardly feels it, and so on and so forth, but it's still pain. He's crying. And you can't say Shechayanu, because Shechayanu is an expression of unmitigated, pure joy. And by the same token, we don't say Shechayanu, that blessing, before counting the days, because the very fact that we're yearning for something means we don't have it. It's elusive. We're yearning for thousands of years and we still don't have it, so there's a little bit of pain. Yet we're hopeful and we're joyous that it's going to happen, but it's still not a complete source of joy. So that's the second meditation, to awaken our yearning. Sometimes we get caught up with all the things that affect our lives, and we can't experience yearning. We can't think of other things. We're just happy that we're functioning at a basic level. So we have to awaken that feeling of yearning in us, and that's what the counting of the days accomplishes. But the third explanation is that it's a process of preparing for the giving of the Torah. If you take slaves, for that matter, prisoners, who are slaves? People say slavery was abolished in the 19th century. No, it wasn't. Just one form of slavery was abolished. We have other forms of slavery. Ask any child if he's free, she's free. But prisoners are certainly slaves. And you take a prisoner who only knows prison life. I've dealt with some prisoners who've been in prison from the time they were teenagers. And they would get out after a few years, come right back in, and spend most of their life. I once was asked to visit a prisoner who was there. I think he was the longest staying prisoner in the New York State system. He was in his mid-80s, and he tried to get paroled. He was there for murder. He was dealing with the mafia. From the time he was a teenager, he was already in prison most of his life. Take that person out of prison and says, here's the Torah. Keep it, follow it. There's no way that that's going to work. Just because you know that to be free, you have to have a sense of responsibility. You can't just impose it on someone who has a slave mentality, who is coarse, who is uncouth, who is just not refined, person who has no higher sense of existence. So you need to be educated. You need to be refined. And that's what the counting of the Omer is all about. It's about refining ourselves. It shares a connection to prayer. What is prayer? Prayer, where does it say in the Torah you're supposed to pray? It doesn't say anywhere you're supposed to pray. It says you're supposed to serve God with your heart. When do we serve God with our heart? When we pray. Prayer is not just saying words and asking God for goodies. Prayer is where we are massaging our heart, so to speak. We're developing our feelings for something higher, for something more meaningful. It's about changing your feelings. And that's what Sphero also means. The word Sphero, which is counting, is related to another word, actually it's in English as well, sapphire, a luminous stone. It gives off light. We bring light into our personalities. What is our emotional makeup? So the Kabbalists have taught us, and this has become part of mainstream understanding of the counting of the Omer, that we are in possession of 7 emotional traits that parallel God's attributes. We'll talk about the 7 in a moment. And each week is devoted to refining one of those 7, to bringing light into one of those 7 traits. So by the time we finish counting, we're ready for the Torah. We're a little bit more sophisticated. We're no longer just like animals. And this is where Passover ends, in a sense, and Sphero begins. Passover, where were we when the Passover happened? What were we? We were slaves who had no spiritual experiences in our lives. We were just downtrodden slaves. So we were not ready for liberation, but God says, I don't care. If I don't liberate you now, it's now or never. The Kabbalists say that there are 50 levels of impurity. The Jews had degenerated to level number 49. If they had gone down one more level, they would have been lost forever. They would have been dead spiritually, and there would be no hope for them being liberated. So God says, I don't care, by hook or by crook, I'm taking them out. And God revealed himself to the people, performed miracles, and they were out. But they were not changed. if God does not change a person just because he performs a miracle for that person, it's incumbent upon that person to then work on himself or herself. So that's what Sphero is in relation to Passover. Passover is where God reveals himself, and it ignited our godly souls temporarily, and then the people had to go through a process of refining themselves day by day, week by week, and that's what we do now as well. So counting Sphero is where we pick up from where God left off. It would be a very pleasant life if God did everything for us. We wouldn't have to do anything on our own. But then why would we need to be created? What does God need us? If God is doing everything for us, would you like a little child, a little infant, the mother will do everything for the infant. But when the infant gets a little older, the mother is supposed to be giving the child some independence. Don't lead the child every minute of the day. Well, that's what we are. We're children. We're God's children. So God saves us because he can't afford to let us fall out of the picture. But then it's our responsibility to start working on ourselves. And that's what Sphero is all about. There's no time of the year, perhaps the month of Elul has a parallel, but we're not going to go about Elul now. But this is a period of refinement, 7 weeks of refinement and bringing light into your lives. There's a verse in the Song of Songs. The Song of Songs is a biblical book, and it's a love story. If you read it literally, it sounds like two lovers are writing about their love for each other. Very graphic. Rabbi Akiva, the famous sage, said, all of the Torah is holy. The Song of Songs is the holy of holies. It's the holiest book in the entire Bible. Why? Because it's not about a love between a man and a woman. If you take it literally, it's a love between God and us reciprocating that love with God. So in that book of the Song of Songs, the one lover says to the other, Mashcheni, pull me, acharecha nerotza, then we will run after you. Which, if you take it literally, it means one lover is saying to the other, I want you to pull me, and I'll run after you. I'll reciprocate. But then there's a problem over there. Mashcheni is singular. Pull me, we will run after you. Who's the plural? So the Hasidic interpretation is that Passover is where God says, where we say to God, Mashcheni, pull me, pull us out of the quagmire, get us out. But it's only the godly soul that's speaking. The animal soul is dormant in terms of its relationship with God. The animal soul is not looking for anything. The godly soul is being pulled. But afterwards, during Sphero, when we refine our animal soul, we will run. The godly soul and the animal soul will run after God. And then it says, the king brought me into his chambers to be intimate. What is that referring to? Shavuos. Shavuos is when we are intimate with God. But it requires preparation. First Passover, God schleps us out, draws us out of the quagmire of the terrible spiritual decadence of Egypt. And then we started working on our animal souls by counting the days, which explains temporarily, without going into it much deeper, why every day we count 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Each day means we have another day behind us in terms of our refinement. We are 1 measure of refinement, 2 measures of refinement, 3 measures of refinement. So that explains the third meditation of Sphero, that it's a period of refinement, of focusing on our animal soul and refining it 1 day at a time. Now, why do we have 7 weeks? Because, as I said before, there are 7 emotional faculties or attributes that each one of us has. And I'm going to list them now. And after I finish, we'll recite Today's counting. And explain what the significance of this day is. First attribute, yes?
So when you say this day, it's the day that started really last night.
Right, the day starts at night and it continues until sunset today. Okay, so the first attribute is called chesed. Chesed means kindness. That's the attribute that humans have to be kind to others, to show love and connection to others. The second attribute is gevura. Literally, gevura means might, strength, power, judgmentalism, rigidity. But it's generally understood to be the opposite of chesed. Chesed is where you want to extend yourself to others. Gevura is where you restrain, where you say, no, I have to hold back. I can't enter into this relationship. I have to take care of myself. That's an example of gevura. A judge is supposed to use gevura, judgmentalism. If the judge says, I don't want to be judgmental, then why is he a judge? Now, sometimes a judge realizes that it's better for the person to be lenient if he has the leeway. That's all part of judgmentalism. We often hear people say we can't be judgmental. That's a myth. There's no such thing as a person who's not judgmental. The second someone walks into a room, what do? You size the person up. You look at the person. Is this friend or foe? Is it a potential person I would want to have a relationship with, or perhaps not? We're always judging. So this topic of judgmentalism, why we say it's not a good thing, we'll discuss some other time. But everyone has that trait of judgmentalism. That's gevura. That's one form of gevura. Obviously, punishing someone is a form of gevura. Then we have tiferes. Now, some of these attributes have multiple meanings, multiple applications. So I'm giving you one system. Tiferes literally means beauty or harmony. It's the amalgam, the combination, the synthesis of chesed and gevura. And it's always understood, it's many times understood to be the power of compassion. Compassion is not kindness. Kindness, a person who is kind, who doesn't have compassion, is a person who doesn't use any judgment at all. The person, a drug addict, comes to you and says, give me some money for drugs. And if you're a kind person and that's all you have, you'll give it. But if you're a compassionate person, you won't. A compassionate person could sometimes know that this person doesn't deserve something, doesn't deserve to be let out of prison, but out of compassion, they'll let him out. Let's say they have to go to a funeral of a loved one, they have that, they'll let him out on a furlough. So compassion means that you take into consideration the judgmental aspect of your personality, of what that person deserves or doesn't deserve, and you override it with compassion. So it's an amalgam of kindness and judgment. The next one is called netzach. Netzach literally means victory. What it refers to, what is it that a human being who's, let's say, in a war, a leader who's fighting a war, what do they want? They want victory. So they're going to go through it. They're not going to give up. It's a form of tenacity, stick-to-itiveness, stubbornness. Person who says, you know what? I don't necessarily, you're in a relationship that started with a lot of love. And then you say, I'm not really in that state of love the way I was, but I'm going to stick to it because I know it's the right thing. So it's considered an offshoot of kindness, because it means you're connecting yourself to whatever it is, to a person or to a situation, but you're doing it not out of passion, you're doing it out of commitment. So netzach is the power of commitment that we have, even if we don't have the passion. Then hod. Hod literally could mean either grandeur, but most of the time we interpret it as gratitude or submission. Like we say, moda ani, thankful am I. Moda, the same root. Yehuda, Jew, comes from that root. And what is it an expression of? When you're thankful to someone, hod, you submit to them. You're conceding that it's their effort that got you the favor. It wasn't you, it was them. You're accepting someone else. That's a form of humility. That's hod. The next one is called yesod. Yesod literally means foundation, but the metaphor for it is the actual physical union of two people. That means that your relationship is one of intimacy. It's a powerful relationship. It's not just a casual relationship. And in terms of our relationship with God, it's a very powerful connection between you and God. And the next one is malchus. Literally, malchus means sovereignty, royalty. So one way of understanding it is the power of leadership. And sometimes it's identified with the power of speech. Because leadership, a person who is in a leadership position can only accomplish what he or she wants to accomplish with speech, giving orders. If a king cannot communicate, he's not much of a king, not much of a leader, because he has no way of exercising control. So we all have these 7 traits, and then each one of these traits consists of the other 6. So I'll just give you an example of the first, chesed shebechesed, kindness within kindness. That's day 1. What is kindness within kindness? Kindness is where the act is kind and the motive is kind, where everything about what you're doing is based on kindness. But then there's gvura shebechesed, there's restraint or judgmentalism within chesed. That means that what you're doing is an act of kindness, but your motivation is not the kindness. Your motivation is not to be kind to that person. You have another motivation, but the act is kind, and likewise all the others, they're all contained one within the other. So we have a total of 49. Another important thing about the 49 is it's 7 times 7. The number 7 is a very significant number in Judaism. But one of the deeper understandings of the number 7 is that it represents the cycle of nature, because the world was created biblically in 7 days. That means nature doesn't really know of anything above 7. As soon as you finish the 7, you go back to 7. To do something that's 8 means you're transcending nature. So the first thing that we do before we get the Torah, which transcends nature, it's divine, is we perfect our natural lives. Every part of it, every particle, 7 times 7. Okay, if you want to say it with me. Now, if you do it every night and never miss, there's a special blessing we recite beforehand. Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. But if you didn't do it every night, you leave the blessing out. So we'll just, if you want to repeat after me, and I'll translate it in English. Hayom Asara Yomim Shehem Shavua Echad Ushlosha Yomim LaOmer. Today is 10 days, which constitutes 1 week and 3 days to the Omer. You ever heard of the holiday Lag BaOmer? Well, what does Lag BaOmer mean? Lag is not a word in Hebrew. It's a word in English, but there's no word in Hebrew that I can think of that is lag. Lag is not a word, it's a number. If you want to write 33, you write a lamed and a gimel. Lamed is 30, gimel is 3. So instead of saying the 33 in Hebrew with shloshim v'shalosh, it's faster to say lag ba'omer, the 33rd day of the Omer. That's a holiday. that commemorates two events. One event was the one with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's students who died in this period stopped dying on the day of Lag BaOmer. Historically speaking, we really don't know how many days of this period did they actually die in. Did they die in every single day? Did they stop dying Lag BaOmer? And that's the beginning of the recovery, or it just interrupted one day. I don't think anyone has ever been able to find any sources that give us definitively the time period. And that's why there are many customs. During this period, we don't get married. Now, when I say during this period, some people start with Rosh Chodesh, which will be this Friday. Up until then, they do get married. Some people end the period at Lag BaOmer, and afterwards they will get married. And some people keep both periods. So the restriction on taking haircuts, except on Lag BaOmer, again, there's other, depending on the custom. Those are some of the restriction of listening to music for enjoyment. The question is, what about if you're taking music lessons? If you're taking music lessons, many authorities are lenient, and they say that it's okay if it's not for the sake of just entertaining yourself. If you are in a miserable mood and you need something to get you out of your depression, and it's a medical issue, then you could listen to music. If you're a teacher of music and that's your livelihood, you can teach music. If you want to do it because it's a mitzvah to teach people, as I've been asked by someone, that probably would be a good explanation, a good excuse for being able to play music. But generally, we try to reduce things that are overtly joyous. Personally, I don't understand why it's so strict. But I think if we go back historically, the reason is, I think, much more clearer. That when did this happen? You have to remember, Rabbi Akiva lived at the time right after the destruction of the Second Temple, during which period, over 1 million Jews were massacred by the Romans, men, women, and children. They were as brutal and as evil and as cruel as the Nazis were. Maybe not as much as the Nazis, but they certainly did not stop at anything. After that happened, there was a revolt by Bar Kokhba. Rabbi Akiva was a major supporter of that revolt because he was successful in defeating the Romans, one victory after another. And Rabbi Akiva considered him to be the Mashiach because he was displaying all sorts of signs that he was going to bring a reversal of all the tragedies. And what happened was the opposite. What happened was that Bar Kokhba became an egotist, and he let all the victories go to his head. Instead of thanking God, he thanked himself. He once said to God, "God, don't hinder me and don't help me. I can do it on my own." The ego that he displayed disqualified him, and the whole city of Beitar was massacred. And it was at this time that Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students. When exactly during this time, I don't know. Some people think that it was that these students were not just Talmudic students, these were soldiers in Bar Kokhba's revolt, and that they were killed in the revolt. That's nonsense, because the Talmud says clearly they died in an epidemic because they didn't treat each other with respect. They couldn't get along with one another, and that brought the downfall. So this was not just a tragedy, but it was a dashing of the hopes of the Jewish people. The Talmud says the world was shrouded in darkness at that time. So that might be the reason why it was treated much more than, because there were so many other massacres in Jewish history. But when a massacre happens in a time of suffering and pain, we're used to it, tragically. You don't have too many people talking about the pogroms in Russia. One pogrom after another, because it was a time of persecution. So you didn't have better expectations. But when people are living in a country, a sophisticated country like Germany, at the top of the world intellectually and academically, and in the teachings of ethics as well, and in music and art, in every area, they were at the top of the world. And the Jews felt so secure in Germany the assimilated Jews. And here it turned into the worst massacre in all of human history. That's why we feel that it's because it's closer to us historically as well, but that's probably one of the reasons why the Holocaust evokes a much stronger feeling of Jews than other sufferings in the past. Not just because they were not as bad as the Holocaust, not as many people died, because it really, if someone tells you, well, if there'd only be 1 million Jews killed, we wouldn't feel any as bad. That's nonsense. So it's not the number, it's the situation in which it happened. So that explains briefly why it's a period of mourning. Okay? Any questions?
So if it is joy time, yes? We cannot have joy.
No, I didn't say we can't have joy. Certain kinds of joy have to be reduced.
Life is joy, so what?
Okay, the Rebbe would say a Jew is never allowed to not be joyous. But sometimes the joy has to be overt. We sing and dance and play instruments and we go crazy, like on Purim and other times. And sometimes the joy is muted. But a person cannot live without joy.
So a little bit reduced.
A little bit reduced, yeah.